Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Maoist Third Worldist Collective. Now, so far, no one has joined the Maoist Third Worldist Collective, as someone pointed out to me in a comment. And so, if that project does not work pretty soon, eventually I will simply stop mentioning it. I promise. I'm not going to drone on about something that is unsuccessful. I will work on something that is more successful, and that so far does not appear to be it. So I wanted to point that out in response to the criticism that I received from that one person, which was legitimate criticism. I am talking about something that doesn't exist. Um, in saying that I'm a part of the Maoism Third Worldism Collective, I'm saying that I am a part of myself right now. Do I hope that changes? Yeah, I do. And I think there's a possibility that it might. Even if one other person wants to join it and agrees to join it, then I will be happy, and I will keep on referring to the Maoist Third Worldist Collective. Now on to the topic of this podcast. Yesterday, um, I talked about the possibilities of Maoist third worldists entering into academia. And I suggested critical realism, the critical realism specifically of Roy Bhaskar, as being one possible avenue. I think the best avenue, but I'm biased, for approaching Maoism third worldism, for approaching really any academic topic. I mean, there are critical realists who are economists. There are critical realists who are political scientists. There are critical realists who are psychologists. There are critical realists who are philosophers. There are critical realists who are ecologists, and so on and so on and so on. So the opportunities, I think, are relatively endless, because critical realism is such an encompassing philosophy, or as I prefer, methodology, that I think that it could be applied to virtually anything under the sun. Now, going to pick that up where I left off. I think it is important, even for those of you not planning on becoming academics. And I realize that most people don't become academics. Um, whether for a lack of interest, um, lack of talent in that area. Not everyone is a talented communicator. I'm not sure that I am always a talented communicator, although I try to be as much as I can. But I recognize that people go into a wide variety of different fields. And I myself, before I decided to become a sociologist, had considered many different fields. First, it was theater. I literally started out college as a theater major. Then it was journalism. I changed and became a journalism major when I transferred from my community college to the University of Georgia. And then when I realized that I could not do what I wanted to do, which was basically become a columnist or a radio broadcaster working for a salary that would pay me more than poverty wages, I pretty much gave up that idea. And I decided that my minor, which was sociology, was the best option. And so essentially, I picked my minor over my major. And in retrospect, I think that was one of the best decisions I've ever made. So certainly, academia is not the only outlet for somebody who was interested in Maoism third worldism. I think it's a good outlet. I think it's useful. I think it's productive. But there are many other fields which can be beneficial too. And I think that the more people expand their own interests, the more people explore their own interests and try to find some field that fits in with those interests, the happier they will be, and also the happier they will be able to make other people. Here's one suggestion. So the old man speaks. The old man speaks. When I started community college in New York at Nassau Community College, if you want to know the precise name of the place I went, I took an interest test. I went to the counseling area of the college, and every college or university has a counseling area. And I took that interest test basically to clarify to myself what fields I thought I might be interested in. And surprising to me, the field at the top was not something I thought would show up there, and that was librarianship. Honestly, I do not think I would have enjoyed being a librarian. Maybe it's possible, I suppose, but when I think of the things that I would like to do, librarianship is not something which pops up in the center of my head. A lot of other things do, even theater, but not librarianship. But nonetheless, I would suggest very strongly that if you are about to start college or university, that you go by the counseling department and ask them about specifically an interest test. I know that for me, now this was a long time ago. This was going back to 1974. So I have no idea how things have changed or if they have changed. But taking that interest test did not cost me any money. And I can't imagine that it would cost any money now either. Um, it was a part of my academic preparation. I saw it as a part of the tuition I was paying to the college, to the community college. And so I went in there and I took it. And sociology showed up there. So did journalism, but it was not at the top. Again, librarianship was at the top. Nonetheless, I would suggest that you take a test like that. For all I know, there might be some tests of that sort on the web. I would be skeptical of tests on the web. Why? Because as a sociologist, I know that most tests on the web are not reliable or valid. They have not been pre-tested, and so there is no way of knowing whether the test you are taking has any real validity or reliability at all. It may be a complete waste of time. I'm not saying don't take it, but if you take it, take the results with a grain of salt. Don't take the results that seriously. Again, my suggestion would be to go in and take a test. If you are at a college, or even if you are not, there are places you can go where you can take tests like that. For example, you might find a community college in your area which will allow you to take a test of that sort, but if you are not a student, they may charge you money for it. How much that would be, I don't know. I doubt it would be that much, but You might have to pay for it. You might. I would not be surprised. Nonetheless, it is always good to think about carefully what it is that you like. The worst thing in the world is to be stuck in a job that you hate. I know too many people who are in that situation or have been in that situation. They chose a career not because they liked it, but because they thought it would make them more employable. I know many people, for example, who majored in business administration. It was not because they liked business administration. It was because they thought, well, this is something which is useful. This is practical. Well, maybe, maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. But if you don't like it, how useful is it going to be to you? So I would carefully consider that. Don't just choose a career because it is potentially profitable. Carefully consider what it is that you want to do. Pick a career that is in line with your own interests. Because if you are not interested in what you are doing, that lack of interest will be communicated to your employer, whether you know it or not. It will be. An employer can always tell whether an employee really likes what she or he is doing. For example, if you really like what you are doing, then most likely not only will you do the work that you are assigned, but you will also do work that you are not assigned because you like what you're doing. And so you will be really attached to your field. You will want to work there. You will look forward to going to work every day. I can't imagine many worse things than having a job that you genuinely hate. So, looking at the job outlooks, and you can find those out very easily, is okay. Nothing wrong with looking at the job outlooks. But don't rely entirely on them. When I decided to become a sociologist, I looked at the outlook for becoming a sociology professor, which is what I wanted to become. And I saw that the outlook at that time, anyway, was rather bleak. And in fact, it was bleak. But what I realized was the reason it was bleak primarily was because most people who get a degree in a particular field are not willing to travel to other places. They want to stay where they are. I had no desire to stay in any place or to live in any particular place. Now, moving to Alaska, moving to Minnesota, moving to Vermont, probably I would not want to do that. But there are plenty of places you can go to if you have mobility. Now, that mobility might decrease somewhat if you are married, because then you need to consider not only your job, but the job of your spouse. And that can add an additional complication to it. But nonetheless, my strong suggestion for anybody who is planning on going into a career, and it doesn't matter how old you are. You may think you are too old for a field. Take my word for it. You are not. You are not. When I was a PhD student at Mississippi State University, there was one person who was in um, my class, I guess you could say, who had an office right near me, and she was in her 60s. She was in her 60s, and she was just starting out a PhD in sociology. And guess what? She got a really good job, a really good professorship. Now, how long that lasted? Well, I can't imagine it lasted that long, but at least she got a job in something that she enjoyed. And that is really, I think, the most important consideration, working in a field that you genuinely want to work in. After I finished up my master's degree, after I finished up my PhD, I had about 6 months between that time and when my first professorship started. Now, that professorship was not a permanent one. I was replacing a woman who was on maternity leave at Caldwell University in New Jersey. So briefly, I stayed with my parents in New York, and I would do a reverse commute. As people were commuting into New York City, I was commuting out of it. So it was kind of strange. But it also made it a lot easier. And there were times when I literally slept in my office with the permission of the college, because my classes sometimes ended so late that going back to New York and then going back to New Jersey really made no sense. But that was the beginning of my career, working as a temporary professor. But even though it was temporary, so what? So what? You are getting experience. You are getting something to put on your CV, your vita. Now, a vita is kind of like a resume, although it is more for professional or academic purposes. Usually, a resume will be no more than 1 or 2 pages. A vita or a CV might be as long as 10 or 20 pages, because you are literally trying to list every single thing that you have done. The purpose is different than a vita. I'm sorry, than a CV, than a resume. With a resume, you are trying to attract the instant attention of the employer. With a vita, you're not. Employers will carefully look at your CV or vita and decide whether you are somebody who should make it to the final cut. Once you make it to the final cut, then it depends on whether you make it to the list of people who will be called in for interviews. So I did everything by the book, and it worked out well for me. Now, what would I suggest? For one thing, I would suggest getting a copy of the book, What Color is Your Parachute? It is revised every year to account for constant changes in the job market. It is an exceptionally well-written book. Please, please get a hold of a copy of What Color is Your Parachute, and make sure it is a relatively new edition of the book. Read the book from cover to cover and take the advice of the writer. I have summarized some of that advice in what I have just said, but that is not enough. You need to read a book like What Color is Your Parachute? There are other ones like it. There's one older book called Guerrilla Tactics in the Job Market. That's also fine. The problem is that it's kind of old, and it really does not account for all the recent changes in jobs and job availabilities. So while I would not discourage anybody from reading Guerrilla Tactics in the Job Market, that would not be my first choice. My first choice, again, What Color is Your Parachute? It is a weird title for an excellent, really an excellent, excellent, excellent book. Please read that. That will give you some hints. So basically what you're looking for is guidance, whether it's from taking a job interest test, whether it's from reading What Color is Your Parachute, whether it's from speaking with people who are already working in a field that you want to go into. All of those things can be helpful. You want to get as much information as you possibly can. Now let's come down to the question why. Well, one reason, obviously, is so you are a happy person. We all want to be happy people. Nobody wants to work in a job that they despise. So you want to be a happy person. So choosing a job that you genuinely like or think that you will genuinely like is always the best thing to do. And don't worry about making a mistake. Don't worry about it. Once you are in a college or university, you can always change your major. I did several times. There's nothing wrong with that. People will commonly change their major in their junior year of college or university. It is not the end of the world. It really isn't. If you are missing some courses that are required or are prerequisites for courses in your new major, you can simply go back and take them. In many cases, you can take them as electives, which will mean that literally you would not lose any time at all. So that's my thought. Take it for what you want. But if you want to be a successful Maoist third worldist, again, you don't need to be an academic. Maoism third worldism needs people with all sorts of different kinds of skills. Whether you become a medical doctor, whether you become an optometrist, whether you become a dentist, whether you become a garbage collector, whether you become a police officer or a firefighter or whatever, it doesn't matter. The main thing is that you like it, that you have chosen that career not because you think it is employable, but because you like it, because you genuinely like it, because it is really something that you want to study. it is something that you want to devote your career to. And careers last a long time. You don't want to spend 20, 30, 40 years in a job that you despise. And sadly, there are too many people who do precisely that. I feel really bad for them, but I can't change it. They made the decision. So I hope that you will take my advice to heart as somebody with experience and use that experience of mine to pick something that you really, really want to do. Service to the third world can be multifaceted. Professors are not the only people who can serve the third world. People in all sorts of areas can do that. And if you reflect, just sit down, maybe lay down on your bed, close your eyes, and carefully reflect on what you want to do based upon all the input you've gotten and how you can relate that to serving the world, to being a better communist. And so I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say. I devoted my podcast yesterday, as I said, to academia. Why? Because that's what I know. I know academia. It was the field that I pursued for my entire career. It's what I did, it's what I know. But I know people who work in a lot of other careers too. And they too can help the third world and the fourth world. For instance, consider becoming a social worker. Why not? Social work is a wonderful field. You can actually learn how to help people. Take a case, work with a person. That is especially useful if you plan to stay in your own country, as I did, and help the fourth world. The fourth world needs a lot of social workers. There are many people in the fourth world who are desperately poor, whether that is because of a disability, whether that is because of their ethnicity, or something else. Whatever. Social work, I think, is a very valuable field for Maoist third worldists to consider. So let your imagination run loose. Literally, let your imagination run loose. Do not feel bound by anything, because whatever it is that you are thinking about doing, believe me, somebody else has thought of it before. And find people in that field and talk with them. You'd be surprised, or maybe not surprised, at how many people are anxious, even excited to talk about what they do. I know I was. When I would have a student come into my office and talk to me about becoming a professor, all the lights would turn on inside my head. I would be instantly excited. Gee, here is somebody who wants to go into a career that I am in. So again, those two things, Pick out something that you are interested in using the various techniques that I have proposed or others. And second, pick out some field which might be beneficial, ideally, for the third or the fourth world. This has been Mark for Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.